I'm R.A. Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. The Washington Mystics. Just a few short seasons ago, we would be talking about them as a team set to be a consistent contender. But times have changed. I'm here with Matt Cohen to chat all things Washington Mystics. And welcome back to the show. Very excited to talk with Matt Cohen, Winsidr's own. We're chatting all things Washington Mystics. Matt, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Arya, how are you doing?
Oh, a little hangover, whatever. Let's chat, okay? Washington Mystics, because I feel like, for the past however many, since 2019, I feel like they've been basically trying to recreate the 2019 Magic. And as often happens when you try and recreate Magic from yesteryear, it didn't work so well. I'll briefly summarize, recap, however you want to do it, the 2023 Washington Mystics season for us, man.
Yeah, things really started out pretty well, mostly because they were healthy and they had a really healthy Elena Deladon who had her first full offseason ability to keep herself in shape and play basketball and not have to deal with any kind of health issue for a while. And so really until like the end of June, so the first month or so of the season, things were looking pretty well. There were a few games over 500. And then the injury bug comes. Shakira Austin's out for, I think it ended up being like a month and a half. Elena goes down with an injury. Ariel's out for a little bit. Natasha gets hurt at some point. And so the season really falls off the rails pretty quickly from there when 4 of your starters are in and out of the lineup. So they finish at 19-21. They miss the playoffs, and here we are.
Well, and here we are exactly. I feel like with this team, we should probably talk about who they lost in free agency before we talk about who they gained in free agency. And we can debate this a little bit, whatever. Like, I guess the 3 big names, as it were, I want to be, we can, I guess, say 4 names. Natasha Cloud, Elena Deladon, Tiana Hawkins, who, if I remember correctly, unless I'm completely spaced, has not signed anywhere yet. She's a player I would not be surprised to see, even though career-wise she's had up and downs. I would not be, if she's looking to play this season, I would not be surprised to see her sign to a team like an Atlanta or a New York or a few other places I have in mind, just as a player who can add things as a bench role player to a team that wants that. Heck, even, well, no, Indiana would be crazy, but whatever. They also lose Christy Tolliver, who, honestly, I don't even know. I don't want to be too mean. I don't want to be too nice, but I wouldn't even necessarily consider her like a big lot. Like, she probably should have retired a little bit earlier. She was probably more of a coaching crutch to the new head coach of the Washington Mystics this past season, if anything, in my opinion. But, who knows? So they lose those big players. And I've gotten a lot of flack for this. And I assume maybe you agree, maybe you disagree. Coring of Cloud or Deladon. It was kind of the biggest discussion, and I'm only giving this a moment to talk about because, for being blunt, this is a pretty cut and dry episode of what we're going to talk about, right? Okay, they're starting a rebuild. It's pretty obvious. T and Oppressor basically said we're punting for the next 2 years. We're not even trying to win. So when you look at that and you go, okay, your 2 best players leave in Natasha Cloud and Elena Deladon. Some might argue that Ariel Atkins is a better player than one of those 2 at this current point in the season. Fine, whatever. I'm not trying to throw shade. I'm just saying, 2 of your best players leave. If you were T, and I'm talking about GMT, capital T, not lowercase t, do you agree with the move to core Deladon? Would you have cored Cloud? how would you have handled this situation differently based on public knowledge information?
So if I'm Mike, I obviously want to get something back for these players. And my guess is that there had been enough conversations going on towards the end of last season in which he understood where Elena and where Natasha were, because he was able to get Ariel signed midseason last year to come back so that she wasn't a free agent. And so as the season wore on and you saw both those players were still unsigned, there had to be writing on the wall for Mike to see, okay, either we're interested in moving on or they're interested in moving on. If I'm Mike, I have to look at it and say, I may or may not want to have these players back. Maybe I want to go in a different direction, or I'm okay with the rebuilds. And so if there is a player who signs that core and comes back, who am I okay having back? And to me, I would probably have agreed with him and chosen Elena. I think Natasha Cloud has been a very fine player for this team. She played a really important role for a while. But I also think in some circles, maybe her welcome had worn out a little bit, and she is limited. She's a good point guard. She can do a lot of things, but she is limited also, especially on the shooting side. And so I'm guessing is that Mike was using a little more name recognition, using a little bit more of her resume and saying, I'll core Elena. She's going to, if she comes back and plays for us, great. She could be a great veteran, a great leader on the team, whatnot for the youngsters. Great, presence for Shakira to keep learning from, or someone may want to have that on their team, like a Vegas, like a New York, like any of these teams that have championship aspirations, who could use a veteran like that, who, kind of like what the Candace role is in Vegas, who can also have an Elena in that kind of role. And so I actually agree with Mike on this one. I think he made the right call, and I think now it's just sort of a waiting game to see. Elena's already said that she's probably not going to play this year, but who knows what training camp brings?
There's so many elements to it because, one, if we're assuming that the reports that came out, and from my deductive reasoning, I'm not going to say that the reports that came out are all fully factual. What I'll say is that, and that's not like a knock to the reporting, what I'm going to say is that from my understanding, it seems like, right, there's always a leak. It's coming from somewhere. A player, the team, an agent, whatever. To me, it seems like it was coming more so from the player side of things. And at first saying, oh, she'd be interested in playing for, well, I forget what the other team was besides Phoenix and Vegas. She'd be interested in playing for. So when you put that out and then you basically try and backpedal later and say, well, I don't actually know if I'm healthy enough to play. I don't know. That was if I'm going to play. To me, the whole thing is just a little bit, it gives me red flags and the ick, as the youth say. So for me, it's just okay. But back to the actual coring thing. Honestly, hearing you describe it, it makes more sense to me that they don't core Cloud, because here's the thing. If you core Cloud, how many people are going to, let's assume, right? I understand Richard Cohen would probably push back at me for saying this, but when we're talking about coring, let's assume that you're going with a max, right? Because I have a hard vision of Natasha Cloud getting a max offer and a coring and then turning that down, even to go to a different team that's contending, right? I think there's a little bit of a difference there. And so if DC goes, okay, let's say we have two options, core Cloud, Chlor Deladon, or I guess third option, don't do anything. But if you core Cloud, is your team any closer towards the rebuild? Because the ultimate goal is a championship. And some teams have to realistically say we're punting for a little bit of time until we can get to that point. Does keeping Natasha Cloud on the roster help them get closer to winning a championship in the near future? No. Now, people will push back and say, well, does keeping Deladon? I would say no, not really. I mean, if you keep her and she's playing in 4 years when you're arguably finally able to be a contender, we can have a debate, whatever. I don't think so. But the fact of the matter is, if you core Deladon and it's an option of her not playing and you not losing out on that situation, right, on the money, the cap space, the roster spot, or using that on Cloud, no, I don't care what anyone's going to say. Elena Deladon has more trade value, trade capital worth than Natasha Cloud. And so I feel like I'm doing a horrible job of trying to explain what's in my mind, but if you keep Elena Deladon, you have an opportunity to get trade back or keep her on roster. And that's any of those options are more beneficial for Mystics than keeping Cloud or trading her. Like, even if you're going to get a return for Cloud, the return you're going to get is going to be a lot less. So for me, it's just like a no-brainer of why you would do that. And especially considering the holdout of Delhi saying, I'm not even going to play. I'm just going to sit out, whatever. I don't blah, blah, blah. Like, that's not a pull for DC to do anything. Like, that doesn't force their hand in any way, shape, or form. And if there is a GM in this league who's going to be a hard ass and do what they want, I feel like it's capital T. Which do you think of these 4 players, this might be a ridiculous thing that left, has the largest impact on, I guess, their outcome this coming season? Not that it really truly matters, as rude as that sounds.
In terms of where they are now?
Yeah, like where they are now, obviously we're viewing this from the sense of they're not trying to win a championship. So does Cloud make the young players better? Does Delhi make the young players better? Does Tolliver? Does Hawkins? Which player, I guess, do you think the Mystics, if they had their way, would want to be active on roster for this season, I guess?
I mean, I have to think it's going to be Elena Deladon. And a lot of that, I don't actually think comes down to the play. I mean, if we're looking at the entire organization, Elena Deladon has been the face of this organization for a number of years now. And so you have to want, I mean, Mike and Ted and everyone else in the front office has to want Elena Deladon healthy, playing on this team. And even if that means she's not, she's certainly not going to be her 2019 year. She's not going to be any of her other MVP, level play, but she can still play at a pretty good level considering, all that she's been through the last few years. Having her out there and playing puts butts in the seats. And I feel like if I'm Mike, that's the player that I would hope would want to be on this team and would want to be there, because just from the financial standpoint of putting butts in the seats, concessions being sold, I'm here to watch Elena Deladon play basketball. That's who I want. Natasha Cloud, awesome player. People, was a big fan favorite. People liked her. Tiana, I think, was always underappreciated and undervalued on that team. And certainly Christy was a big fan favorite, being from Maryland and whatnot. But you're right. She didn't play a whole lot last year. She was hurt and definitely filled in sort of that player coach role. So of all the players that could be back, who I think would have had the biggest impact and still could, depending on what she ends up deciding to do by the time training camp starts, Elena Deladon, to me, both on court and front office wise, would be the biggest one that I'd want.
I should say, because, I have a history. From my understanding, maybe Deladon has had setbacks. I'm just talking specifically from public knowledge information that was put out, whatever. Maybe she's not healthy enough to play yet this season. Who knows?
Maybe. That's possible.
Yeah, good points. I definitely agree with that. And I think hearing you talk about it, I love to play the world of what if. What if DC doesn't trade their number 1 pick to Atlanta? What if DC, granted, now considering the first round swaps, which we will talk about, and DC having draft capital for this season and next, I don't think we can necessarily talk about that just yet. We need to see what happens in next year's draft, given that DC got that pick from Atlanta. But you have to think Shakira or Ryan Howard. You got that is going to be floating about. The flavors will be dancing on my tongue until we see what happens in next year's draft, because you kind of are going to question it. You're going to think about it. So that's all right. Let's talk about who they did add. Carly Samuelson, Dee Richards. Who else? We got Steph Dolson coming back to DC. Van Loo, Emily Angsler. Did I forget anybody? Cunane.
Alyssa Cunane comes to the team training camp wise.
Should be like, here's the thing. I have a love-hate relationship with Big T in the sense of I love to hate and then I love to love. I like what he's doing in the sense of getting a bunch of young journeymen and putting them together on a roster for a season that doesn't matter. If, let's say, of their 6 off-season signings, one of those, two of those are on the roster in 2-3 years when they're like ideally in their world making a push for contention, then I'm sitting there and I'm going, okay, you did well this offseason, and that's a success. It doesn't matter how many of these players, and like, yes, we can talk about the kindness of giving them film and blah, 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 but like, what's your take on them adding a bunch of what's an appropriate, how would you classify these offseason signings?
So I think what's really clear is a lot of teams this offseason are keeping the limit on contracts to 2 years, given that the CBA is going to be up in 2025. There's going to be new negotiations, hopefully more money. So all these teams that are only giving out 2 years, max deals or protected deals or whatever it might be, I get that. So T going that direction with Dolson, I understand on that regard.
Side note, I just want to say that it's an interesting aspect that both teams and players seem to be incentivized in certain ways to do these shorter contracts. Often in these situations, it might be more beneficial for the team to want longer contracts or the player to want shorter contracts. But it's very rare that it's both. And what we're seeing right now is because of the uncertainty. It is both. Sorry, continue.
No, that's fine. It's a good point. And so I think, and we had talked about it with Rachel and whatnot. And I think when Mike first made all these moves, we were like, what are they doing? What's going on here? Especially I think, with the trade bait of trying to move Elena for other pieces or whatnot. I would have loved to have seen them have gotten Jordan Canada to this team before they traded her. LA traded her to Atlanta. You look at it and you're like, well, what is going on here? And it's really unclear. But if you then understand, as you pointed out, what Mike had said to the press of, we're basically punting on 2024, probably to possibly 2025, and we'll see where things go from there. And so if you understand that, then there is no harm in what's going on. You have a couple of really solid pieces in place. You've got Ariel Atkins, you have Shakira Austin, you've got Brittany Sykes, and you've got a solid backup in Queen Egbo. So what is the harm in taking a flyer on a Didi Richards, on an Alyssa Cunane, on an Emily Engsler, and going, as T has shown time and time again, the ability to find the foreign talent. Just last year with Lee Mong, who had a fine season as a backup point guard to Natasha Cloud, with Julie Van Loo. And so what is the harm in bringing those players in, seeing what they can do, and maybe finding a role in this team or moving them elsewhere? And also, who's to say what's going to happen come training camp time to fill other spots with players that get cut from teams? And so there's a lot of cap space right now. Even if Elena were to sign the core and come back, there's still a lot of cap space for this team. And so for a team that is not likely to compete, to put themselves in the best possible position for 2025 draft, when we know it's going to be a stacked draft starting with Paige Beckers, you have to position yourself in a way where you have to be realistic. And I have to give Mike credit where it's not easy for a lot of teams to be like, you know what, we're punting and we're doing the rebuild. And so kudos to him for getting out in front of it. So do I love the deals in general? No, I don't love giving term to Dolson. I don't like giving term to players who are so-so. But given that it's only 2 years until the new CBA, given that where this team is at going in 2024, I don't mind having a veteran presence like that to help, bring the team together. I just wish it was more in the backcourt, but I digress. And so overall, I'm kind of with you of like, why not? And let's see where it goes.
It's very interesting though, because it's so rare you see a team openly, like, it wasn't even like a read between the lines. It was just a blatantly like, we're tanking. We're not trying to lose every single game, but we're tanking. We're aware. And here's the other thing with them is like, we were talking about this off air a couple days ago. Like, we look at, obviously we're getting ahead of ourselves. We look at the lottery this coming season. Realistically, the teams that I don't think have a real shot of, just when you look at the power structure of the league, I do not think the Mystics or Chicago, sadly, have a real shot of making the playoffs. Now, some of these other teams, LA, I would agree that also probably does not have a real shot of making it, so it leaves one spot. But like DC is just like not like, how is DC gonna beat out even in Minnesota? How is DC gonna beat out in Atlanta even in Indiana. You know what I mean? Like it gets to a point where it's like, okay, you have to be better than these other teams, and I just don't see a way that they can do that. And so I appreciate it because, there's some teams, as I'll publicly say this, like I was complaining to Matt texting the other day, like, look, I'm all happy for the Indiana Fever for getting Leah Boston, Caitlin Clark, like good for you, cool. But I hate when it happens that you just, in my coining of the phrase, you Jar Jar Binks into it. You just like fail so horribly that eventually good things happen. And it's just like, no. So DC, I at least see more of a plan, and at least it's more angled for this. And I think, look, there are some players that I'm excited to see their growth and see them with a full season. I'm actually curious what happens with Maisha Hines-Allen this year. I know you're not as high on her as I am. We've seen flashes, and then it's been pretty much lights out since. But I'm curious what happens in a contract season where she's going to be an unrestricted free agent afterwards, coming off of what was a big 180 contract. So it's going to be an interesting one. I guess we got to talk like, what would you? All right, in our mock draft on Winsidr that just recently came out, you and Rachel kind of butted heads on this one, kind of got into a disagreement, kind of started calling each other names.
That's how we do.
So why don't you run down who you and Rachel have going number 6 to the Washington Mystics in this draft, and kind of your logic, your thoughts as to why, and yeah.
Yeah. So for me, when I'm looking at the Washington Mystics, they have a lot of bigs, right? And so I don't see them as needing like the front court set piece there. I want to look for somebody who can play a little bit more in sort of that 3, maybe that 4 role, depending on the lineup that you have. And so for me, if I'm looking at what the Mystics can do at that position, I've said it since earlier this season, I really would love Alyssa Peely to fall to them, but I really think that Aaliyah Edwards, who actually just declared today that she is going to be coming into the draft out of UConn. And so that is the kind of player who, yes, is a little bit on the bigger side. She plays the 4, sometimes the 5 in UConn. And so I would love to see a player like that who has a little bit more of that versatility, flexibility in her positioning, could play a 3, could play a 4. She can't shoot the 3, which is kind of what this team really revolves around, is not shooting well from 3. And so she'll fit that Washington mold pretty well. I think she'd be a really good piece to continue to build around, to fit her in with Shakira, especially if Elena doesn't come back, especially if Maisha's gone after this year, especially if Queen Egbo doesn't take that next step, especially if Tiana, all these different, pieces here that we have to consider. And so helping run out the front court, I think for the Mystics in that way could be an avenue that they could go, especially if Aaliyah Edwards can continue developing her, even if maybe her 3-point shot, but certainly her jump shooting where she can play more of a 3. Rachel, on the other hand, went where I really want the Mystics to go, but I just don't see them going there this high in the draft, and that's the point guard. Obviously, with Natasha Cloud gone, there's a huge hole at point guard. Now, Julie Van Loo might be that player. I don't know if she's ready and capable and good enough to be a starter in the WNBA. That's TBD. And let's assume for now that that's not the case. And so who is going to take over the reins there? So Rachel went with Georgia Amore, who is a fan favorite of both of ours out of Virginia Tech. We love her game. We love how she plays, can shoot deep, can facilitate. She loves playing with Elizabeth Kitley, loves playing with a big in the pick and roll. So if the Mystics do take her at the 6, playing with Shakira Austin, Queen Egbo, all these bigs, she would love it. It would be right in her wheelhouse. I don't see her going that high, but I do. I mean, if they do, I wouldn't be surprised. But that is really a big area of need for them. If Julie Van Loo can't make the roster, or if there aren't other players on other teams that could get cut who are the floor generals, Brittany Sykes is going to be the point guard on this team. She was a lot last year. Is that the kind of player? Is that really the best role you want her in? Now, on a toss-away year, does it really matter? No, but if you want to get your team to be able to develop offensively, I don't think Brittany Sykes is that player you want to have being the point guard all the time. So, in that way, I can understand Rachel's logic of Georgia Amore might be that player who they take at the 6.
I feel like Two things. One, you never want a position like point guard to be reliant on an overseas player. Maybe that's old school me. Maybe that's crazy. Two, hearing the way you describe it about why they wouldn't take her necessarily, Georgia, I'm more leaning in yes now, only because it's Mike T. Only because it's Mike T. And I feel like historically, yes, he's been known to find diamonds in the rough, to draft players who a lot of people view as realistically will go later in the draft. And then he goes, no, that's the person I want. I know they have the abilities we're looking for. I'm taking them now. It doesn't matter because they're going to succeed. I'm thinking of Ariel Atkins. So for me, I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh, this could be that diamond in the rough. And if you guys get it right, I would love that. But this could be that diamond in the rough that T finds. Because for me, if there's any coach or GM coach, whatever you want to say, he's only a GM now. But like if there's any GM that I trust to find ways to use, like to actually use draft picks. Like so often I'll look at second, third round draft picks or like later first round draft picks for teams and I'll be like, okay, it's almost a wash. Like, are they even going to play this player at all? Is she going to last training camp? Blah, blah, blah. When it's Mike T, I don't feel that way. I have confidence that he can find somebody who could actually at least hold on to a roster spot on this Mystics team specifically. So I'm excited for that. I think it's going to be an interesting one. Even what they do with 21, or if they get another pick this year or whatever they do, and then moving on to those other years. So,
well, I want to be known before we move on. I still think that Mike's going to trade the pick because that's his way. That's what he does. Yeah. So I think he might even trade this pick down in the draft or into next draft and try and find his facilitator on a team where maybe like someone in Dallas where they have too many roster spots, or to Indiana if some of their players fall out of favor there. So I mean, we know Mike likes to wheel and deal. I would not be surprised if that pick gets traded.
You heard it here first. Okay, hopes and dreams, I guess. One of them, I want you to view it from like, we're sitting at 2025 now, looking back at the 2024 season. And then I want you also to kind of look forward to the 2024 season. Like, what's your dream to happen this year? And then like, what do you think realistically will happen?
So my dream for this year is for Eric to be able to continue to develop an offensive scheme and offensive schemes that put his players in the best possible position to find offensive consistency. It's been an up and down road, I think, for Mike and for Eric over the last few years of finding out whether that was a personnel decision, whether that was them not changing things up or changing things up too much. It always felt like the offense just kind of stalled out. There's a lot of, individual play. There wasn't a whole lot of movement and action and stuff like that at enough times to allow the offense to flow. My hope is that offense now gets built around Shakira, where Shakira's offensive, we know how good she is defensively, her footwork, her athleticism, assuming she's healthy, are fantastic. I want to see her offensive game bloom. And I want Eric my dream is that he will make that possible in 2024. My expectation, or what I'm hopeful for the season, is competitiveness. If we know that they're going to tank, I don't want them to be non-competitive. I want them to be able to compete and be in games and play hard and learn how to come together, even if half this roster isn't going to be there a year or two from now. But for the core players that are there, I want Ariel and I want Brittany and I want Shakira to be able to work together and find more of an offensive rhythm together that really was lacking last year. And I know part of it was injuries and in and out of lineups and whatnot. And Brittany Sykes had to sort of take it on her own most of the nights. But nevertheless, my hope is that there can be competitiveness, and my dream is that Shakira in 2025 is going to really have turned the corner offensively and will really become the superstar I hope she is.
She was a player that I was real hyped on going into last year, and obviously the injuries really derailed it. What I'm excited for this team is two players, Shakira and Atkins. I want to see them build a foundation of a 1-2 punch. I want to see them build a foundation because both of them have I still think Atkins has so much potential that we haven't seen necessarily yet. And I'm very curious to see what happens because we've seen her on teams where she wasn't designed to be the number 2, but it happens because of injuries or just how the season goes about. I'm excited to see a full season of planning ahead of saying, hey, this is going to be, you're one of the more senior players on our team. You're a leader now, because Errol Atkins is a player who is so good, but does disappear offensively at times. And it can be extremely frustrating. I mean, it was extremely frustrating, more so frustrating, arguably, because you had Natasha Cloud, Elena Deladon, Atkins, all these other players who everyone would disappear at the same time. And it's almost like, okay, well, was it, we always had questions of what was it? You know what I mean? Like, was it that they were all relying on someone else, that they didn't want to play hero ball? Blah, blah, blah. All these questions. You don't have as many of those questions anymore. Now it's just kind of like, hey, you're the number 2 on this team, or you're the number 1 on this team, arguably. How is that going to work? What are you going to do? So I hope to see Ariel Atkins really grow this season. I think that would be amazing. That would hype me up. And then Shakira just, like, I don't even count last year. So now she's entering truly her second season, hopefully full season. It'll be exciting to see kind of, what goes down there. And then, like, which Shatori are we going to get this year? Which Brittany Sykes are we going to get this year? Which Maisha Hines-Allen? So there's a lot of questions, a lot of players to prove themselves, even players who have been on this team and have been asked by the Mystics to prove themselves in the past. Will they finally do it? Matt, last question for you. You know how this ends. Who's your GOAT?
Other than Pickle, Tamika.
Ooh.